This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
IndyPram is IndyPram on Indy Live Radio. IndyPram is IndyPram on Indy Live Radio.
Welcome to the latest IndyPram podcast on Independence Live Radio, and my special guest today is Amy Callaghan. Hello, Amy.
Hi.
And I can imagine all listeners on Independence Live Radio wondering, who is Amy Callaghan? Well, Amy, how are you prepared one day to potentially be full of the news throughout Scotland and the UK? Everyone will be talking about Amy Callaghan because you are standing as the Scottish National Party general election candidate for East Dunbartonshire with the plan to unseat Joe Swanson, leader of the Lib Dems.
All I can say is bring it on.
Great. Now, everyone will now know who Amy Callaghan is. You've got a big job ahead of you.
Yes.
How prepared are you?
Well, we've already hit the ground running with our campaign, to be honest with you. We've been out chatting to voters in East Dunbartonshire for months now, just making sure that they're aware that, in fact, they already are aware that their current MP just pops up from time to time, whereas I'm going to be here, I'm going to be local, and I'm going to represent them to the best of my ability. And I think people are starting to realise that already. Yeah,
because there's a massive history of Jo Swanson originally living up here, then she moved down to Bath in the county of Avon. Now she lives in Wiltshire. We're so used to seeing her picture in local publications, but these are only on fleeting visits. Your predecessor, John Nicholson, was up every week doing surgeries, seeing people, and living in the constituency. How do you feel about what you're going to be doing?
I think the difference between myself and Joe Swanson is, one, our policies, but also the fact that I'm actually just going to be here for the people of East Dunbartonshire. I won't be a pop-up MP. I'm going to be here day in, day out, making sure that I'm representing people's views and I'm accessible as possible to them. John done a really great job for the 2 years that he was the MP here, and I just want to build upon the work that he's done already. I think it's really important that I'm representing, the entire constituency, but also individuals within it. So, for example, WASPy women, making sure that their campaign's heard and recognised and that they actually feel listened to. Also, different voters within the constituency. I'm a young candidate, I'm 27 years old, and I really want to stand up for the young people within East Dunbartonshire. Jo Swanson might claim that she's doing that, she's fighting the plight of climate change, but in actual fact she's taking donations from fracking companies whilst walking on climate change marches. That is not tackling climate change.
That's hypocritical.
Yeah, that's completely hypocritical. What I want to do is actually tackle climate change. Let's lower our emissions. Let's actually do the things that we know are going to matter and get, our climate back on track.
Right. I'd like to cover that in greater detail in a wee bit. Kind of initially have an introduction regarding where have you come from yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a grassroots party activist. I've worked on campaigns all over Scotland, fighting for a fairer Scotland and to end the scourge of austerity. All I want is a more equal, diverse and representative Scotland for everyone here. I've worked in East Dunbartonshire for the past 3.5 years. I'm a children's panel member where I've seen, firsthand how awful the measures of austerity have been to children, young people and families all across Scotland. But I would say, it's very, very apparent in East Dunbartonshire as well. I'm also a teenage cancer trust activist, fundraiser and volunteer researcher as well. So that's something that's been, really, really prominent in my life for the past 8 years and something I'm incredibly proud of. And I think what it does is highlight that if I get a project or I get a task, I see it the whole way through. I've just recently had a piece of research published by the British Medical Journal on the impact of mental health struggles for young people with cancer. That's something that it shows how well-rounded I am as an individual. I'm not just focused on becoming a politician. I want to just make things better for the people here. That's
great. Right, on the austerity side and the children's panel, could you give us any examples? Obviously, you can't give absolute details, but some examples of the impacts of... Because Jo Swanson, when she was in government with the Tories, voted for so many measures which affect people today. What sorts of implications are you seeing in practice?
I think it's fairly safe to say that in children's panels all across Scotland, we've seen a real rise in poverty levels, and I think that's been really particular throughout certain local authorities with the implementation of universal credit. a lot of the issues that we're seeing, domestic violence, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all these different things that impact on the lives of children in Scotland are so deeply rooted in poverty. And unfortunately, the Liberal Democrats propped up the Tory government to make these decisions, and they were the architects of austerity. They drove these decisions that have only been to the detriment of the people of the whole of Scotland. It's actually really despicable, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think, the SNP government in Scotland are doing a really good job in mitigating a lot of these things and a lot of the detrimental changes that we've seen introduced by the Tories and the Liberal Democrats. But mitigating something is such a difficult task. Like, if the Liberal Democrats hadn't actually propped up the Tories in the first place to introduce proposals such as universal credit, then the Scottish Government wouldn't have the sort of damn job that they do in terms of mitigating them. It's not fair that the Scottish Government have had to introduce a £10 benefit to try and fight child poverty. We shouldn't be having that level of child poverty in the first place. We're a really rich country. The United Kingdom is a rich country, but Scotland is a rich country in its own right as well. And the levels of poverty we're having they're so disappointing, and it's so sad to see. I think, this should be the best country in the world for children to grow up, but unfortunately the Tories, the Liberal Democrats, and I would say in particular Joe Swanson, are the driving force behind that not happening at the moment.
Because another aspect that they voted for, which has been in the news recently, was in relation to WASPI, and you mentioned that earlier, that they voted for the reduction.
Yeah, and that's a group of women who just feel completely let down, and so they should. They've lost their state pension. They're going to be getting it years and years after they were told to. I was speaking to a voter in East Dunbartonshire just the other day who said that she was, led down the merry path the same way all other WASPI women were, receiving letters telling them they're getting their state pension at this age, and then suddenly they get to that age and it's, oh no, you're not getting your state pension at that age anymore. And I think the SNP group down in Westminster, and in particular Mary Black, have been doing an exceptional job in highlighting this issue. But, unfortunately, the representation that East Dunbartonshire have and the WASPI women here have just simply isn't good enough. And Jo Swinson has not stood up for them. She's actually voted for them to, lose further rights, which is just so abhorrent and, actually really quite disgraceful. And it's something that I would be sure to challenge on day one if I was elected the MP for East Dunbartonshire.
And also in relation to pensions, let's look at the difference between pensions. Just now, the outlook for a continued Tory government, they're talking about retirement age of 75.
Yeah.
Whereas for the SNP conference, we're talking about increasing the pension from its awful position of 29% of average earnings. Is that going to be a good message to get across?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic thing. I think a lot of the time when it comes to elections, older voters are ignored. And I think we've got a really, really strong message coming from the SNP this time round, in that our party conference just voted that in an independent Scotland we would have pensions at the median level. So you're talking about pensions in the United Kingdom at about £8,000 a year just now. The median level's between 12 and 14,000. That's huge for pensioners in Scotland. No one should be living at a level of poverty when they're in their old age. We don't want that in an independent Scotland. We don't want it in Scotland just now, but if we actually get the power to change things in an independent Scotland, let's make sure that happens, and let's make sure we're spreading that message so people are aware that's actually the case. There shouldn't be a need for MPs to hold heating surgeries and all these kind of different things, because pensioners shouldn't be living in poverty. It shouldn't be the case in 2019.
And we also want to see the end of food banks, but austerity. Yeah. But I agree with your points that you mentioned earlier regarding austerity, because if you had a more equal society where you don't have such extremes between poverty and the rich, then it's going to be a case that we can narrow that gap, and obviously poverty can be stricken out completely. There's no need for poverty in the 21st century. No,
there's definitely not. There really isn't. And unfortunately, the policies that the Tory government, as they're renowned for, the policies that they've implemented has caused this crisis. It's caused food bank usage throughout the United Kingdom to soar. And the Liberal Democrats have propped that up from day one in the coalition, and they've never actually stopped now. Jo Swinson, as leader of the Liberal Democrats, has not ruled out a further coalition with the Conservatives, but she has ruled out working with opposition parties who are far more progressive in getting rid of Boris Johnson and stopping a hard Brexit. That to me speaks absolute volumes, and I hope it speaks volumes to the people of East Dunbartonshire as well, that Jo Swanson has not ruled out working with the Tories, but has ruled out with working with allies.
Yeah, but she got this form for Liberal Democrats for not supporting Labour. They'll say, "Oh well, we would support them, but not for that particular leader," and that's happened numerous times over the years. So,
do you know what I mean? I just think that's an absolutely ridiculous argument to make for Joe Swanson to make. To be perfectly honest with you, it makes sense for the leader of the opposition, as in Jeremy Corbyn, to be the caretaker, head of government. You're talking about a caretaker government to see you through a crisis. Brexit is a crisis at the moment. And if it's going to be beneficial to the people of Scotland, which I believe it would be, we should be supporting that happening. But Jo Swanson's just more concerned about the fact that it's not her that's seen that through, and it's not her name that will be on the deal. I genuinely believe that's what she's concerned about. And we should be putting the people before party at all times.
Yeah, right. How are we going to get that message across? How are you going to get that message across to the residents of East Dunbartonshire? And really, it's also the point I would like to get across is, how do you convert or get people who have voted Liberal Democrat to at least consider making a difference? Because I'll tell you, it's coming from a personal point myself. I voted twice for Joe Swanson before I became politically involved, and it was only because of the independence referendum in 2014 that I became, should we say, politically aware. Before then, it was a protest vote because I didn't vote Labour, I didn't vote Conservative. I was entitled to a vote, so it was just a process vote without really thinking what the party was behind it. Now, many people will be like that. They're not politically switched on, and it's not just East Dunbartonshire, it'll be throughout Scotland. People are not politically switched on and are aware, and it's getting their message across to those people to come on board.
I think Jo Swanson's actually doing a really good job of getting that message across for us, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, yesterday we saw that her and her party abstained on a vote in protecting the NHS. They abstained on it. Yep. That to me is just like a vote for sending the NHS into privatisation. And the bill was lost. And the bill was lost. So, I think the people of Scotland and the people of East Dunbartonshire resonate with that message. We know how important our NHS is, and that's the message I'm trying to get across there. Is Jo Swanson won't stand up for you, and each day we're getting a different little thing showing us how she's not doing that and how she's not standing up for Scotland. So I mean, I've got a great campaign team around me, and we're out every single day on the doors talking to people of East Dunbartonshire about the issues that matter to them, and that's how I'm going to frame my campaign, on the issues that matter to the people here. So far what I've been hearing is, that they're just fed up with Brexit, they're just ready to get rid of that, they're not interested. They voted to remain. East Dunbartonshire voted 71% to remain, which is higher than, the Scottish average. So they're just ready to get done with Brexit, and they want to remain, within Europe. I'm hearing that climate change is incredibly important. The education is really important, and ending austerity primarily is very, very important. People, regardless of what part they are in East Dunbartonshire, they seem to realise how important it is in the wider picture to end austerity, to make sure that, every child's got like a good start in life, and every family's got, the money that they need just to get by, and that we shouldn't be negatively impacting anyone. I think that's the most important thing. But like I said, Jo Swanson keeps giving us little nuggets here and there in terms of using it against her. But it's just making sure we get that message out and across to as many people as possible. Yeah, because in relation to that vote yesterday, there was history there anyway, because when they were in, Lib Dems and Tories were in government together, they also voted for the privatisation of parts of the NHS. And a lot of people don't appreciate that. The more that the NHS is privatised down south, the less we get to look after our NHS up here. So there is an implication to what's happening down south. I think the message to take from that is that it's not just historic that the Lib Dems are unwilling to stand up and protect the NHS. It's now just as recent as yesterday, but it's it's an ongoing history. They haven't been standing up for our NHS. They haven't been protecting our NHS and our beloved services that we have from there. And so many people in Scotland rely on our NHS, both for employment and for their healthcare needs. And we should be doing, and the SNP government do all they can to protect that. And we should make sure that we're doing the same. Jo Swanson, I don't know what her logic behind that was, but she doesn't seem to care about protecting the NHS at all. No, not at all. Right. There is a potential, obviously, for a general election being called either before the end of this year or beginning of next year. Everything, as we speak just now, everything's up in the air. There are so many decisions that are being decided, including the potential extension of a delay for Brexit. At this point in time, they're going to meet, EU Council going to meet tomorrow, but
President Macron of France is not in favour of a 3-month or longer period. He's looking at a couple of weeks. So when it comes to a general election, I feel everything's changed since 2014 in Scotland, insofar as it's polarised now between those who are for independence and those who are against. And obviously we've seen the numbers now in favour of independence increasing. Yeah. But when it comes to a general election, do you agree with me that it would lead to more tactical voting rather than people actually voting for a policy, for a party that they would normally be aligned to?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, in East Dunbartonshire in 2017, what we saw was that the Conservatives never actually put up a fight at all. They actually seemed to encourage their supporters to vote for the Liberal Democrats, you know, encouraging like a unionist vote versus an independence vote. And I think that's likely what we could see, you know, in this upcoming general election as well. Throughout Scotland, you know, not just in East Dunbartonshire, you know, anywhere. And, you know, the key messages that we're trying to get across to voters here is that the only way to remain in Europe is for an independent Scotland to be within Europe. That is really the only way. I don't see the Liberal Democrats proposing anything at all as an alternative. 1 minute, Joe Swanson wants a people's vote, and the next she wants to revoke Article 50, and then she's flip-flopped back to a people's vote again. It's so unclear. Whereas from day one, you know, the SNP set out their Scotland's place in Europe paper, and from then on we've you know strongly campaigned for an independent Scotland within Europe. And so I do genuinely think it could end up, you know, this vote could come down to like an independence or a unionist vote, depending on how it's played in each constituency, but I do think that's quite likely, yeah.
So you're looking for the SNP to bring out a strong message towards independence in any manifesto for a general election? Yeah,
I think that's really important. I think we need to be making sure that that's what we're going to head for, especially with the First Minister's announcement at conference that she's going to be seeking a Section 30 order before the end of the year. You know, that could even happen before a general election occurs. So that'll give the people of Scotland a much clearer choice. You know, with the Brexit referendum in 2016, we didn't know what we were voting for, you know, unless you properly looked into it. The people all across the UK weren't actually sure what it meant. You know, Boris Johnson putting some numbers and lies on the side of a bus isn't a manifesto. It's not a clear paper of what's actually happening and what could actually happen if, you know, we're seeing what it is now and it's still a mess 3 years on. So I think it's really, really important that we have like a clear choice and that we've got a clear pathway for voters to know what they're voting for if they vote for the SNP, that they're voting for a party that's going to be promoting independence and that wants this to happen as soon as possible.
Yeah, because I think we also have to get the message out there that in an independent Scotland, we start from scratch. Yeah. So it's not necessarily going to be the party structure as it stands now. Of course not, yeah. Because new parties will come about, new representations. It's a case of you don't refuse to buy a house because you don't like the wallpaper. Of course. It's when you've bought the house, you change it.
Yeah, the SNP is a vehicle and a driving force for independence. Yeah. You know, the first government of an independent Scotland does not necessarily have to be an SNP one. Uh-huh. You know, it could be a whole new party by that point, or it could be an existing party that's then got a Scottish branch. Yeah. You know, I think that's something to make really, really clear to people is that, you know, we do have clear plans now. We've got like a clear plan on pensions, whereas before when we were out talking to voters on the doors, we weren't really sure on pensions and things, but now it's a lot. I think with Nicola Sturgeon as leader, things are just a lot more straightened out. We've got the answers to the questions that we've always been looking for, and we're just ready to hit the ground running with this independence campaign.
Well, the one thing I'm particularly interested in, and it was one of the areas which was still, there was question marks in 2014, and that was the economic case, and that we didn't have we keep on getting we complain about GERS because a lot of the GERS figures are assumptions, but people were still asking, well, what is the potential for Scotland, or what does it currently produce now? And it's this imbalance that we keep on getting the figures. So we send 120 billion, or we generate 120 billion to Westminster, but we only get 30 billion back. Yeah. People want to know where that money is spent on. Yep. We know about HS2. We knew about it went into the tunnel under the Channel to France. It's gone on the M25. This has been investment by Westminster over the years and saying, "Oh, well, Scotland benefits from it." We need a clearer picture of total Scotland generation to convince or just knock over the edge those who are wavering or have only been brainwashed
and even
by
just,
what they're told.
Just relying on the sort of, we've got oil, that argument, still exists, but, Scotland's got an incredible and booming food and drink sector as well, that we can put so much, focus and reliance on.
But the thing about oil is it's not going to be an important issue in the future, because if we're generating our own...
We're moving to renewables.
We're generating... We get to a position where we're generating more than we need, so that can be exported. We don't need to go mad over exploration and extraction of fossil fuels. Anyway.
For example, the building, the conference centre, the SNP conference was just in Aberdeen, was powered the entire 3 days that we were there by hydrogen cells.
Yeah.
I mean, that's absolutely incredible. That's using renewable energy, tackling climate change, and also, not using the oil argument that we've been using, that people have been using against us for years and years now. One example I would give about Scotland's food and drink sector is the Scottish Salmon Company, whose profits have went up by 25% from one deal that they had with Japan, for transporting salmon over there for making sushi, for a sushi company. The potential for that in an independent Scotland is sky high. It's huge, it's momentous. And let's allow that to happen. Unfortunately, the position we're in just now is that the UK are imposing restrictions, and us leaving the EU is eliminating us from another market. But an independent Scotland within the EU is only going to have more potential for further growth and development, I believe.
Well, the other aspect that gets thrown quite often around at Westminster is knocking the SNP. It says, right, well, you want an independent country, but then you want to give away your independence by going into the EU, and so you're going to go back into the Common Fisheries programme. However, the Common Fisheries, we've never had a strong voice. It's always been Westminster having the say on our behalf on quotas, etc.
Exactly.
Whereas, the point I've tried to get across is the fact that, wait a minute, the fishermen, if they're talking with the Scottish Government, we would be the ones negotiating on their behalf as an independent country.
Look at the incredibly strong position that Northern Ireland's in right now, and look at the way the EU's looking out for their best interests at the moment. It's incredible, the position that they're in compared to the position that Scotland's in as part of the UK, because you're completely right, Ray, in that the UK government isn't listening to Scotland's voice, whereas if we get to actually represent our own voice, can you imagine the difference there? In terms of the Brexit negotiations, Northern Ireland's had a clear structure and a clear voice and a clear plan the whole way through, and they've been well looked after in it. So I want the same for Scotland. And it's not so much the restrictions that the EU put on its member countries, it's the protections that it brings and the rights that it brings. I think that's the part that people are forgetting. There's so many bills that have to be drafted through the UK Parliament just to bring about, I think it's 89 bills, to bring about protections that we would lose out on from not being part of the EU. And no one's talking about that part of it. All they're talking about is the part of the restrictions, the so-called restrictions that's imposed on us. But if we're an actual independent member of the EU, we've got the chance to, fight our battles for ourselves and have an MEP standing up for us over there.
And also change the EU for the better.
Exactly, and to make
change.
difference, you need to change things from within. Let's change it to a system that's better for us and more suitable for us. But to do that, we need to be a part of it.
I was going to say, you need to be a member.
That's the nature of it, yeah.
Yeah, because when it comes to a lot of people, I'm sure it just goes over their head when they're talking about food safety. But for example, I was very impressed with something that Ruth Watson mentioned. In the States, it's a case of prove it's dangerous. Whereas in the EU, it's prove it's safe.
Exactly. And, that implies to food, but it also implies my dad owns an engineering company, and it applies to our engineering structures as well, such as bridges. The EU put in a lot of safety regulations for that kind of thing, which are the highest standards worldwide to make sure that we'll be kept safe, not to make sure that there's not going to be an accident, and to avoid any dangers, not to wait till the worst case scenario happens and then go back and make sure that these things are in place.
Yeah.
Whenever I go to America, I'm always kind of startled by the sort of lack of an awareness of health and safety over there compared to what we have here. And a lot of that does come from EU protections and guidance. And I think it's an absolutely fantastic thing that we would be losing out on. My dad was actually saying, that structures, they wouldn't have to be as structurally sound if they didn't have to apply to apply by EU regulations anymore, which is something that we should be talking about and discussing instead of just, we'll deal with that, if and when we leave the EU. That's not something I want for Scotland.
Mm-hmm. In the case of we do thinking, let's go forward to independence for a moment. There is a very strong pro-EU vote in Scotland,
Yep.
62%. Nicola has spoken about she wants to be a full member. Do you feel then it's actually right as an independent Scotland that an initial government would actually hold a referendum after joining initially as a full member, if that is the satisfactory route that Scotland wants to go forward? Because we have to remember some people,
Yeah, of course.
30-odd%
Yeah.
voted against the EU.
I think it's probably right and fair to have, a referendum straight away, either that or the first vote for a government. And an independent Scotland would be on a platform of, those parties running to be part of the EU or not to be part of the EU, or, they could run on different platforms, like be part of the single market and, different trade agreements and things. But yeah, I think it's definitely important that it gets put to the people. We're a democracy, and be that either a vote or a referendum. I think that's something that's really, really important.
Well, I think the numbers now in favour of the EU, now that we know a lot more, I think everyone knows a lot more than they did
they've
in
soared up.
2016.
People have become a lot more politicised since the 2014 referendum and since the Brexit referendum as well.
Yep.
When I was out on the doors on Saturday, I just found it so interesting. So maybe went to just over 100 doors, and I would say well over half of them had the news and Parliament TV on. When has that ever happened before? And it was quite startling actually, because they were like, oh, there's a candidate on my doorstep. Well, this is actually happening, and it's so important that we're out there and talking to people and actually understanding their views. And it's a shame that it's taken something like Brexit to politicise people.
Yep.
And I would like to have done so in a much more positive way, like hopefully the next independence referendum could do. But I do think it's really fantastic that we've got a next generation of voters who have grown up in this newly politicised Scotland, which I think is quite fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Have you been involved much in the Yes movement?
Not an incredible amount. I'm involved with my local Yes group, just in a kind of light campaigning extent, and I do all the work that I can in the background. But I will be getting far more involved as soon as a referendum's called and in the build up to that, I'm sure. Yeah.
No, the reason why I was asking is I attend a lot, and some of them I record for the podcast, but the attendance of them is generally middle-aged to elderly, very few young. And that came to mind, and I'd like your opinion on it. It was at a conference when the 20 and 22-year-old were interviewed, and didn't have one of them in particular. She's only just started as an activist, so she's got an excuse. She didn't have the full facts available. Yeah. But we don't see the youngsters attending a lot of the Yes
I think that's really evident in Yes stuff and in SNP stuff. As as a young candidate standing up here, it's great, but I'm addressing a room of middle-aged individuals standing there, and try to get people engaged and discussing the issues of the day, like climate change, that I'm trying to promote as a young candidate, can be quite tough sometimes. I'm hoping that we can energise our campaign with me being a young candidate, and hopefully get more youth out, and hopefully in turn that will then bring more people to Yes groups locally. But it's honestly, it's one that stumped me before as well, why more youth.
Exactly, because I'm retired.
Yeah.
And you see that the figures from the 2014, and it was most of the elderly that voted against it, and yet it's most of the middle-aged and elderly that are actually activists. We're doing it for the young.
I was at a branch meeting in Bishopbriggs on Monday night, and that's what you're seeing all the time. We couldn't elect a youth officer because there was no one who was actually there who was youthful. So that's slightly problematic in that sense. And the SNP has a huge youth movement within it. But it's just unfortunate that it's quite obviously vastly spread out across Scotland, and it's not very well concentrated within specific areas. But I definitely think it's something that hopefully when an independence referendum is called, or at least if it's looking quite likely that it's called, that the youth will hopefully get involved and get on board a bit more. I know that certainly happened last time round, so hopefully it happens this time again.
Because I noticed when obviously there's a Welsh independence movement has started in the last year. And looking at the marches that they had down at Cardiff, and in particular Carnarvon, it was full of youth. Yeah. I'm looking at it and I thought, where are the elderly? All I can see is youth.
That's it. I mean, you look at these climate change marches that are happening across the globe just now, and it's the youth that are leading them as well. And I think that's something, maybe it's just the difficulty in the build-up, and that's not maybe when young people would actually get involved. But I'm hoping that, when it's called and when we actually have something to, properly concrete to be campaigning on, that we will get more young people out and get them involved.
Yeah. On matters that are reserved to Westminster, is there anything particular that you're interested in? Then hopefully you'll become an MP.
Yeah, I mean, obviously number one priority is getting rid of weapons of mass destruction in Scotland, and I think all our SNP MPs down in Westminster have been championing that issue from day one. I think that's incredibly important. And, not getting rid of the base at Fastlane at all. It's about turning it into a conventional military base in an independent Scotland.
Aye, because you don't want it as someone said recently about a sovereign base like Cyprus. We do not want a sovereign base.
No, it's about having, a conventional military base, and hopefully an independent Scotland. But again, just bringing it back to austerity as an MP, and hopefully as the MP for East Dunbartonshire, that's something I'm going to be championing, and making sure that, everyone gets the proper fair start in life, and to make sure that all throughout their life that they're, properly looked after. A 6-week wait for a universal credit payment is not acceptable. It's absolutely abhorrent. And you're talking about, people who lose their job today, apply for universal credit tomorrow, won't get any money till potentially it's basically Christmas time, just before Christmas. That's ridiculous. That should not be happening. And it's the same, and we're seeing, reoffending rates can go up because of universal credit. There is the potential there for that to happen, because people leaving prisons cannot apply for universal credit until the day that they leave and actually get out of prison, and then their 6-week wait without any money or any ability to fend for themselves. That's not okay, and we shouldn't be letting that happen. And the Scottish Government is obviously mitigating this, but why is this policy here in the first place, and why is Joe Swanson voting for it? It's not right, and it's not fair, and it's not just, and it's not something I would support as the MP for this area. It's
always going to boil down to one thing, and that's a democratic deficit.
Yeah.
Even if we send 59 SNP MPs, we can't do as much as we can unless we're independent.
Of course, yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. This is that sending SNP MPs to Westminster is
vital.
It's vital
for the
and it's a vehicle towards the movement of independence. The work that they're doing there is the work that the SNP MPs are doing down there is absolutely incredible. They're standing up for Scotland at every chance they can get. But you're completely right, and that they face opposition at every chance they can get.
Yeah.
As the third biggest party, there should be a lot more that they could do, but unfortunately just met with complete resistance every step of the way.
Ignorance as well.
Oh, complete ignorance,
Total
definitely.
Ignorance of what's been happening in Westminster.
I think the perfect example of that was, Joanna Cherry getting up to speak the other day, just as the entire opposition, left the chamber. It's absolutely despicable. And that was just a very visual example of what happens on a daily basis to our MPs down there. It's absolutely despicable. We deserve to be listened to just as much as anyone else does in that chamber.
We see it so often, whether it's Mr O'Grady or Joanna Cherry, or Ian Blackwood.
Yeah, it's shocking, absolutely shocking.
Because I think there was a hint given away the other day. I think it was Joanna Cherry that actually mentioned when it was happening to her, wait until the SNP election broadcast goes out. So obviously they must be building up some video of that, and that'll be shown of how Scotland's voice is being ignored. Good. Right, Amy, is there any other points that you'd like to mention? You've got a crowdfunder.
Yeah, I do. I've got a crowdfunder. So we obviously have a really tough fight in our hands in East Dunbartonshire, both to get rid of Joe Swanson and also obviously to get the people of East Dunbartonshire the representation that they actually truly deserve. And I know I can be that representation. So elections are expensive and they're tough to fight, and we do have a really, really hard battle here. So if anyone does have any, spare money and they're looking to donate it somewhere, if you would consider donating to our crowdfunder, we would so much appreciate it. You will be contributing to unseating the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who has been incredibly detrimental to the people of Scotland. So, you'd be doing yourself a favour as well.
Yeah. So it's not just necessarily East Dunbartonshire people, but people throughout Scotland. Yeah. I think it's important to mention, contribute to your local MP's campaign, candidate campaign. But if you've got anything spare, go to www.crowdfunder.com/elect Amy Callaghan. Yeah. Yes. I remember the dashes when I saw
that's it.
Or just Google Amy Callaghan crowdfunder. Yep. You'll find it.
It's number one on Google, so you'll find it.
Good.
Yep.
Right. Well, Amy, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution to Independence Live Radio. And till the next time.
Thank you so much for having me. Cheers.
It's a pleasure.
Perfect.
IndyPram, yes, IndyPram, on Indy Live Radio. IndyPram, yes, IndyPram, on Indy Live Radio.
This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
IndyLive.ie